Well, hey, how are you? And welcome to session 6 of 30 Days to Understanding the Bible. We are looking at the Exodus era. Tonight we're going to dive into Deliverance, the Law, which is the 10 Commandments, Kadesh Barnea, and we're going to look at the 40 years of wandering. We'll also talk a little bit tonight about the 10 Commandments. So buckle up, everybody, and let's get started. The Exodus era was the mass movement of the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt and going back to the Promised Land in Canaan. The book of Numbers talks about and estimates that there would be about 600,000 fighting men. So it's reasonable to assume that if there were 600,000 fighting men, there would be women and there would be children. If you doubled that number, that would be 1.2 million. Now, each of those families may have had at least 2 children, so that would be another million plus. In addition, you had the priestly tribe, the Levites who didn't fight, and their wives and their children. So you had probably, at best estimates, they figure a couple of million people that were leaving Egypt during the Exodus. So this would be a pretty big undertaking. Let's dive in and look at the 4 major subjects or major events of the Exodus era. And let's start off with the deliverance. You can find this in Exodus 1, chapter 1 through 18. The Hebrews had been under slavery in Egypt for 400 years, and when they cry out to God for deliverance, God hears their cries, and he chooses Moses to be his spokesperson, to go to Pharaoh, who's in Egypt, and to request that the people be released. And of course, Pharaoh refuses, and as we read in the Bible, God ends up sending 10 plagues. The first plague starts out with, well, it says here the plagues start out bad and they get worse. Well, let me just tell you, the very first thing, when he sends frogs, that would have been enough for me. I despise frogs. Those of you who don't know me, frogs are not my thing. And so that would have been enough for me. But he's frogs and gnats, water that turns to blood, and eventually the death of the firstborn in every household of Egypt. Finally, Pharaoh consents to let the people go. But after they leave, he changes his mind and he chases them down, and he's made it to the Red Sea. And the Israelites have crossed the Red Sea. God has parted the Red Sea so that they could cross. Just that in itself, when you think about the number of people that were leaving Egypt and they get to the Red Sea, you could see that this would be a massive undertaking to get these people across. But he has parted the Red Sea for them, and they have crossed, and Pharaoh and his army is behind them. And of course, they think, well, wonderful, we're going to get across too. And it doesn't go very well for them. And they die in the Red Sea. So the water's coming together again and essentially protecting the Israelites from the Egyptians and freeing them from slavery in Egypt. And God, of course, has only one destination for them, and that is the Promised Land of Canaan, the land flowing with milk and honey, the land that their father Abraham had settled and was hoping to be their home. This was again going to be their home. Number 2, the law, God's commandments at Mount Sinai. You know, the Hebrew people now start to take on a national identity as Israel. And from the Red Sea, the Israelites travel south to the bottom of the Sinai Peninsula and camp at Mount Sinai. They received God's commandments at Mount Sinai. Moses meets with God alone at the top of Mount Sinai, where he receives the 10 Commandments written on a stone tablet by the finger of God. He also receives a full revelation of the law that is given to govern Israel's national life as well as her relationship to God. And he promises to bless them abundantly for obedience and, of course, punish them for disobedience. Now let's talk about the 10 Commandments for a moment. A lot of times when I ask people, can you name the 10 Commandments? And a lot of people are stumped when you ask them that question. It's not something that we think about every day, and a lot of people haven't seen the list. They don't know where it's located. They don't know what's on the list. Some might be able to name 1 or 2, maybe 3. But I find that most people struggle to name the 10 Commandments. So let's look at those for a moment. I found my list of 10 Commandments in Deuteronomy 5. And so we'll just go over theirs. So over here in Deuteronomy 5, starting in verse 6. First commandment being, you shall have no other gods before me. I am the Lord your God. Verse 6 says, I am the Lord your God who brought you out of Egypt, out of the land of slavery. You shall have no other gods before me. Second commandment, you shall not make for yourself any idols. Okay, so first being no other gods before me and no idols. Keep these things in the back of your mind as we go forward in the sessions to come, because these things are going to become very important in the life of the Israelite people. You're going to see where they kind of don't listen too well. And quite honestly, well, even today, we struggle with the same things that they struggled with. So these are good for us, and we should be living according to these as well. The next one would be not to use the Lord's name in vain. And I think I'm not going to use it as an example right now, but I think a lot of us know what I'm talking about. And if you don't, ask a friend. All right? It usually has the D word involved, and just makes me cringe. And I have to admit, when my life was BC, before Christ, I broke this commandment. I've broken a lot of these commandments that I'm fixing to share with you. All right. Next one would be obey the Sabbath and keep it holy. All right, let me turn the page. Honor your father and mother. The next one, you shall not murder. You shall not commit adultery. You shall not steal. You shall not give false testimony against your neighbor. You shall not covet your neighbor's wife. You shall not set your desire on your neighbor's house or land, his manservant or maidservant, ox, donkey, or anything else that belongs to your neighbor. So those are the 10 Commandments, a list that the Lord gave Moses to give to the Israelite people so that they had a foundation, a place to start on what they were to do to follow the Lord. Remember that he had brought them out of Egypt, brought them out of slavery, and this was their list to start out with. Now, other things would come, but this was the basics. These are the basics for us as well, not just for the Israelite people. The great thing about this is that I always say the Bible is very relevant today, not just back 2,000 years ago. How many of those commandments have we ourselves broken when we look at the list, right? Man, some of them we may not want to admit or ever admit to anybody else, but if we took a good hard look at those, we might find that we struggled with some of those and that we have in fact broken some of those commandments ourselves. And it's things that we should try and repent over. Okay, so the 10 Commandments. All right, well, let's move on to item number 3. Kadesh Barnea. Now, Kadesh Barnea was known as the place of rebellion against God, and we find this story in Numbers 10 through 14. You know, Israel leaves Mount Sinai and migrates north to an oasis called Kadesh Barnea. I might be saying Barnea wrong. It might be Barnea, which is the southern gateway into the Promised Land. You know, there's some discussion that when God brought the Israelite people out of Egypt, he could have taken them the short route. But the problem would have been that they would have faced the enemy much sooner. And he was concerned that they would be afraid and turn back. And as time goes on, and you'll learn and you'll read that they did grumble and say, why'd you bring us out here? You brought us out here to die. I mean, it wasn't perfect. You know, they're human. And humans grumble and they complain. And the Israelites back then were no different. But God didn't take them the short path. It's one of the reasons why they crossed the Red Sea, is because he didn't want them to turn around for fear of what they were going to face. And so he knew if he took them that direction, that was going to become a problem. And so he took them kind of the long way around for their own good. Does he know us or what? He knows us. All right, so at this point, Moses sends 12 spies into the Promised Land to check it out. Go see what we have here. Go see what's there. Go check out the food source. Go check out the land. Tell me all about it. Okay? And see how it's inhabited. It's supposed to be inhabited by the Canaanites. Those are the people that are living there. Give me a report. Okay? Tell me what you think. So the 12 spies go and check this out. Okay? Well, we have a problem. Because out of the 12 spies, 10 come back and say, oh, there's no way we can take this land on. There's no way. It's just not possible. And only 2 out of the 12 come back and say, yes, we can. It is a land flowing with milk and honey. It's beautiful. And that was Joshua and Caleb. Now keep Joshua's name in the back of your mind, because you're going to see him later pop on the scene. But they come back. And these guys, the 10 guys, give the bad news that there's giants and hostile armies throughout the land. And it's just not possible for them to overtake it. Now, think about that for a moment. God just parted the Red Sea for you. You just crossed the Red Sea not too long before that. God delivered you from slavery out of Egypt. And you are saying that there's no way that you're going to be able to overtake the enemy in the Promised Land that God is giving you, when he just brought you out of Egypt and you crossed the Red Sea with Pharaoh's people chasing you, who are no longer alive. And God can't handle or help you conquer the people that are in the Promised Land that he's giving you. Does that make any sense? But yet that's what these guys did. Came back and said, no, we can't do it. We can't do it, right? So as a result, the majority of the people believe the 10 spies over Joshua and Caleb, and they refuse to follow Moses into the Promised Land. And this becomes known as the place of the rebellion against God. Right? They rebelled against God in this place by refusing to move forward. Pretty sad. So, as a consequence, because, when we rebel against God and we sin, there's consequences. We may apologize and say, geez, Lord, I shouldn't have done that. I asked for forgiveness. And he goes, yes, I forgive you. However, there's still a consequence to your action, to your choice. So as a consequence of rebelling against God at Kadesh Barnea, the Exodus generation is condemned to wander in the wilderness. Now, here's the thing. They're condemned to wander in the wilderness until everyone who was 21 years old or older at the time dies. So in the ensuing 40 years, a new generation, comes to leadership. It is willing to follow the leaders into the land. And Moses leads them to the north of the Dead Sea near Jericho, the eastern gateway to the Promised Land. And Moses encourages the people and gives them additional instructions found in the book of Deuteronomy, and then he dies. Can you imagine you've led the people for 40 years through the wilderness, wandering through the wilderness as a consequence of your rebellion in Kadesh Barnea, and you don't go into the Promised Land. Now, there's a reason why Moses didn't go into the Promised Land, and that is because at one point in time, when the people were crying out for water, God said to him, speak to the rock, and water will come out. Well, instead of speaking to the rock, he took his staff, pretend this is a staff, and he just tapped the rock, and water came out, and the people drank. And God said, that's not what I asked you to do. I asked you to speak to the rock so that I would get the glory. Because you tapped it, then it made it look like you did it. And as a result, he punished Moses and he said, you're not going into the Promised Land. Oh, that sounds so harsh. But I guess in my mind, when I think about that, I think that, God had been with them for 40 years. He spoke to you personally, Moses, on top of the mountain, and personally gave you the 10 commandments to give to the people. And so when he tells you, I just want you to speak to the rock, and you go, I think I'll tap it myself. Seriously, dude? I mean, come on. And as a result, he doesn't go into the Promised Land. And it's like, oh, you put up with all that grumbling of the people for such a long time, and then you don't even get to go. When God tells us to do something, I think we probably ought to do it, or there's going to be a consequence, right? Things aren't going to go the way we want. They're not going to go as we planned because we didn't listen. And that's a tough thing. It's a tough thing to have put up with all that Moses put up with. One of the other things that happened was when Moses was up on the mountain for 40 days and 40 nights with the Lord. The people decided, they talked to his brother Aaron. Aaron was with him at the time. Aaron and his sister Miriam were there with the people also. The people start grumbling and saying, is Moses ever going to come back? He might not come back. We need something. We need something to worship. Aaron makes a big mistake and asks the people to give their jewelry, their gold. I mean, I can just picture these women who had jewelry on and earrings and bracelets and whatever else they had of gold, and they turn that up, they take it off, and they hand it to Aaron, and he puts it over a fire, and he makes a golden calf for them to worship. Now, you've had God with you by fire at night, by cloud by day. He brought you out of slavery. You crossed the Red Sea. He's provided you manna in the desert to eat. He's provided you water to drink. And because Moses is delayed a little bit, you suddenly forget, well, he must have gotten lost. He's not coming back, and we're out here going to die, so we need something. And Aaron, his brother, crafts this golden calf that they all dance around and worship. And that doesn't go well when Moses comes down the mountain with the commandments in his hand and ends up breaking them. Like, what are you people doing? Like, why are you worshiping that? Right? Think about, and I don't have I wish I did, had something here. Oh, well, I can use this. Okay? Little box. So imagine that the people gather their gold together and they say, we're going to worship this. Okay? Now think about this for a moment. Pretend this is a golden calf. All right? It's fake gold, whatever it is. But they say, we're going to worship this. Can you ask this to love you? Can you ask this to supply your needs? Can you ask this to comfort you and to guide you and to give you wisdom? And no, because what can I do with this? I can smash it with a hammer, right? I can smash it with a hammer. I can put stuff in it, right? I can't look at this little gold box and say, I worship you and I want you to love me and provide for me and to just see me through and give me wisdom. Really? It's a gold box. It's man-made. That's the other key. It's man-made. This is not God. But yet we have people that are worshiping false gods today that have man-made them themselves, handmade them themselves. Pieces of wood that I can burn on a fire, and when I go camping, people craft idols out of wood. I can take that wood and I can put it on a campfire and I can cook my food. I can stay warm by it. Would it make sense to me to worship that piece of wood? No, it's not something that I can worship. It's not something that is with me daily in my heart of hearts. This gold thing it's not that. But yet we have a lot of that today, idol worship. So the Israelites, when they did that, it didn't go over well at all. It was very disappointing. When they don't see that things are going their way, or they start to panic, then they start to grab on to, well, here's what we think we ought to do. Oh, think they're the only ones who do that? Maybe not. Maybe not. So, lesson tonight from Exodus, the Exodus era. If you're not sure about those 10 commandments, look them up. Deuteronomy 5, verse 6 and forward. Get familiar with them. Make sure you're not breaking them. It's a good place to start. All right. Well, thank you for joining me tonight. I hope you enjoyed it. Hey, listen, if you have questions about stuff, just send me a note. Send me a message. I'll try and answer it. I'll look it up. I'll do the best I can. Something that would help you to better understand maybe what I talked about, what I mentioned. I'm open to helping you any way I can. So thanks so much for joining me tonight, and take care.